Welcome to the show, IB Nation Sports Talk, up and rolling. I'm flying solo. I'm Sean Stiers, by the way. Flying solo for the first half of the show today. Vince is going to join me for some rapid fire in a little bit. We, of course, were off for a few days. The wife and I made the road trip to Cincinnati last week, took in the Foo Fighters, Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati. Dave Grohl and the Foos. I mean, they pretty much always put on a great show, and you get your money's worth, almost 3 hours worth. I think I'm still worn out, and my ears are still ringing. Had a big undercard down there. They had Wolfgang Van Halen, Eddie's son, and his band Mammoth. They played for about a half an hour or so. No surprise, Wolfgang can play. The Pretenders were there as well. Chrissy Hynde, she's 72 years old, and she can still belt it out, man. That voice is still there. They were pretty good as well. A lot of Notre Dame talk, of course, today, but a great Olympic opening weekend. Last I saw, the U.S. still leads the medal count as of tonight. Who knew Snoop Dogg was pretty much the guy we all needed for Olympic coverage. Didn't see that one coming, but he's been a little bit of everywhere. I saw a picture of him today with the fencing team. I saw him taken in swimming. I saw him taken in gymnastics, the whole deal. I guess he's going to be on that. I don't watch The Voice. I don't know if you watch The Voice, but I guess he's going to be one of the new people on The Voice, which of course is on NBC, which of course is why they've got him over at the Olympics. So a lot of Snoop Dogg in the Olympics coverage. I think that's been, again, both unexpected and a little bit fun. So a couple Notre Dame alums picked up gold medals this weekend. Swimmer Chris Giuliano in the men's 4x100 relay, and swimmer Lee Kiefer won her second straight gold medal as well in the women's foil. And I saw there was another Notre Dame, I think she's a sophomore at Notre Dame. She's from Hungary. She won a medal for Hungary, and a men's fencer also won a medal, who is a Notre Dame alum. So it's been going pretty well. At the Olympics, and some of the Notre Dame alums over there doing well. And with the women's basketball team, they beat Japan earlier today. I saw this from DK. Any mention of the other DK, and they get zero tolerance. I mean, I don't know which is worse, the fact that there might be another DK out there, or that the DK that we do know is handing out punishments. So I don't know. Decaf, yes, flying solo for the we in, we out portion of the show. I'll be handling we in and we out. And then we've got Vince coming in for rapid fire later on. So scheduling conflicts, but can you smell that in the air? Football is near. We're just 2 days away from the start of Notre Dame football training camp. And of course, we've got you covered here at Irish Breakdown between the podcast platforms, whether it's YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, irishbreakdown.com. You got the Champions Lounge. Irish Breakdown's got you covered. Camp starts Wednesday. We'll be there for the first full practice observation, and then we'll have a few more 5-period practices throughout camp as well. But if you haven't been to the Champions Lounge, if you're popping in here, maybe you haven't been to the Champions Lounge, haven't subscribed yet, got some great summer offensive intel that Brian put up the other day. I saw him put up some recruiting news today as well that I'm sure is going to shake things up. There's nothing more that I can offer that, that Brian didn't put up there. So you have to check it out, but subscribe to the Champions Lounge, because, that's where you find all that good, juicy stuff. And that's where the we in, we out questions come from as well, right from the Champions Lounge. So come on, Salty. Doing just fine on deodorant. Maybe. Chase Vince out of here. Jesse's actually in Cincinnati today as well. He's with a friend down there, Cubs Reds today in Cincinnati. So he's doing that. Scott, thank you for the super sticker. Much appreciated. Let's get to some we in, we out questions. Let's just go ahead and fire it right up. And again, the place to post your we in, we out stuff is the Champions Lounge. That's where you do it. So let's get going. This one is from Elmer Layden. He says, seems like the media is getting less access each year to practice sessions. I realize that makes it difficult for you guys to assess the team, but is it a positive indicator of Coach Freeman's growth as the head coach? Is it a good sign that he may think he has a product that he doesn't want to unveil yet? Or does having media at practices hinder the focus of the players? So 3 separate things there. And I would say the one that I am the most in on of those 3 options is the part about the product that he doesn't want to unveil yet. Because I think as you kind of sit back and look at this, one, this is going into his 3rd year as a head coach, Marcus Freeman. And while we've had access, it hasn't been what I would call abundant media access. And, I'm not criticizing it or, one way or the other, the amount of access that we have. I mean, obviously, the media, we're always going to take more. And as fans, you should obviously want the media to have as much as possible so you get as much information as possible. I think this is just kind of a case, though, with the one full practice that we're going to get and then a handful of the 5-period partial practice availabilities. I think this is just a kind of a classic case of you've got a new offensive coordinator running the offense. You've got a new quarterback joining him to run the offense as well. And that quarterback, of course, Riley Leonard, we barely got to see anything from him during his spring with Mike Denbrock and this offense. So I think that when you combine that with the fact that the team that Notre Dame is playing in the season opener, Texas A&M, is led by the guy, Mike Elko, who used to be Riley Leonard's head coach, of course, at Duke, and there is some familiarity there. So I think that with Leonard and Denbrock running this thing together and the new additions that they've got at wide receiver, like we didn't see Bo Collins doing anything in this offense because he wasn't allowed to practice with the offense during the spring. I think all of those factors together, there's no incentive for Marcus Freeman to let any more get out there than possible. And we're not going to get to see anything live in terms of that first day of practice because they're going to be in shells. They'll be wearing helmets, jerseys, and shorts. So I personally think it comes down to that. Between the new offensive coordinator, new quarterback who wasn't there to fully run things in the spring. He certainly wasn't there at the end of the spring for the closed door scrimmage and for the blue gold game. So, and they had other quarterbacks running the offense, relatively vanilla during those scrimmages. So why let more get out there than you need to when it comes to, potential for the other team to see anything? That's what I think it comes down to, like why there is only the one full practice that we're going to get to see. And, a little bit more than, the other sessions. We'll get stretching, of course, and then we'll get probably a handful of one-on-ones between the receivers and the DBs and stuff like that. But I think that he wants to keep things as covert as possible going into that season opener because you do have those new variables added to the team this year. That's what I think. Now, all that said, we did at one point last fall, we got to practice and we found out that we were going to get to see not just, like the 5-period practice that was on the schedule, but we ended up getting to stick around for a full practice and we got to see a little bit of scrimmaging and stuff like that. So now, will that happen This fall, don't know. But there's always a chance that we'll get something added that we weren't anticipating because he's done it before. So we'll just wait and see. But again, as to why the full practice sessions is what it is this fall, I think that's what it has to do with the having a new offensive coordinator, new offensive system, new quarterback, working with new receivers and all that kind of stuff. Good question though. DJ, every outlet covering the first day of camp will mention Riley Leonard's health or ankle in the first minute of their report. We in or we out on that? Totally in. I couldn't be much more in, because when you look at, like Brian put his, here are the offensive things to look for. And, we've talked about it on our shows. Here are the offensive things to look for. What do we look? All this different stuff. The health of Riley Leonard is right up there at the top of the list in terms of what everyone's going to be looking for on day one, especially since, again, like the offensive lineman, the defensive lineman won't be going live, and no one's going to be tackling out there anything. But what will be live are the pass routes run by the wide receivers and the throws by the quarterbacks to those receivers, and potentially some one-on-ones with receivers and defensive backs and those kind of things. So how healthy Riley Leonard looks, right up there at the top of the list. So I will not be shocked. I would put this at a minus 100 if I was giving odds, I think, right now in terms of what's going to be mentioned pretty early on. Another one from DJ. 6 different players will have a carry during the season from the running back position. We in or we out on that? I think that I'm going to be out on this one, because like if I look at last year, okay, Estime, Love, Price, Payne, there's 4, Devin Ford, 5, and then that's it. So 5 running backs last year. You don't have Jabron Payne this year. Obviously, you don't have Estime, but you've got Love, you've got Price, you've got Aeneas Williams, you've got Keydron Young. Devin Ford would be the 5th. Now, I'm hearing talk a little bit about this Central Michigan transfer in here. Now he's not on scholarship, so he's still a walk-on. But I think we're probably talking about 5, considering Jabron Payne is going to miss the entire season. So I will go out on 6 and stick with 5. Michael kind of following up. Riley's ankle, Emil Wagner's weight, is Deuce visiting. 3 things Notre Dame fans are obsessed with. And with pretty good reason. See, like TD4ND says Buckner. I don't know. Like, I guess Buckner, honestly, I hadn't really even thought about it, but which shows you, where he is on the priority list. But I think fans are probably more infatuated with Buckner's return than most people in the media. That's my guess. Is it worth noting what Tyler Buckner does on day one? Probably. But don't forget, he's a receiver. He's not going to be out there throwing any passes. I will guarantee you that. As dangerous as it can be, I will guarantee you that Tyler Buckner will throw 0 passes on day 1 of Notre Dame fall training camp. If he does, I'll make Vince eat my hat. How about that for a guarantee? Okay, from Joe Allen. Notre Dame will have to be undefeated to obtain the 5th seed in the college football playoff, because the loser of the SEC and the Big Ten Conference Championship games will be given the 5th and 6th spots. In or out on that? I think I'm probably going to be out on this, because for that to happen, you need the upsets, kind of, like some of these other scenarios that we've talked a little bit about the last couple of weeks. I think that you need the upsets to happen. But let's assume that the favorites win. Like, let's say Ohio State beats Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, and they play during the regular season as well. So both of those teams are going to have at least 1 loss. So maybe that's not the best example, because I don't see multiple losses there, but you're more likely to see a multiple loss team definitely from the SEC, I think, playing in the conference championship game. And again, if the favored team, if the team that won the regular season wins that game, then I think that bumps that number 2 team down, because more likely than not, they're going to have multiple losses. Now, I mean, obviously for Notre Dame, it really for everybody, but for Notre Dame, because of the whole seeding question and the fact that now all these coaches and teams and, whoever affiliated with the conferences, the fact that they, because Marcus Freeman, sent off these light bulbs when he went on ESPN a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, oh, we do have a bye. It's just week 13 when all these other teams are playing in conference championship games. And they all went, oh, I guess that's true, because everyone was talking about the fact that Notre Dame couldn't have a first-round playoff bye. So I don't see the loser of both of those conferences, because there is an and in here, the SEC and the Big Ten. One of those could potentially be trouble for Notre Dame. If Notre Dame is sitting at 11-1, obviously there's a greater chance that they get bumped down. But because there is an and in there, I think at least one of the teams from those two conferences is going to have multiple losses. So I don't think that is necessarily going to push Notre Dame down. But again, Notre Dame wants the 5 seed. Their best chance is always going to be to go 12-0. Tommy Guns, the Bo Show, will get first team reps in the, I think he means boundary, and dominate. I'm leaning toward that. So I'm going to go in on this. And, dominate, I don't know. But the word is strong on Bo Collins and what he was able to do this summer, and working with Riley Leonard and working with the other quarterbacks. And, you went out and got Bo Collins. Why? Because he's got experience and he played for a great program like Clemson as well. So this is a guy with a ton of experience who comes from a really good program, who you're bringing into Notre Dame. We didn't get a chance to get our eyes on him during the spring because of the fact that he couldn't practice with the team in the spring. But I think that there is a very, very, very good shot that Bo Collins is going to be that number 1 boundary receiver. And so I'm going to go in on this. I think he's going to be a really big addition for Notre Dame with both the size and the skill and everything else that he's going to be able to provide the Fighting Irish in that boundary and at receiver. D. Troll Hunter says Notre Dame media's video release from day 1 of practice will be disappointingly short. I'd say there's probably a pretty good chance on that. I mean, how long are those videos that we typically get to see from that? Not very long. Not very long at all. Like you're talking about a couple of minutes tops. It seems like 90 seconds is what it typically ends up being. So I will go in on this. The Fighting Irish media's video release from the first day of practice is going to be disappointingly short. You're going to be wanting a lot. And the thing to do, because we can still show you, different video. We did find out today, I'm not even going to go into it. Like there's going to be some different rules on what media members can and can't post on social media and stuff like that when it comes from practice, unless you're doing it, like from the official Twitter or Instagram account, whatever, those kind of things. So we will be able to show you a few things in this show, though. So look forward to that as well. Yeah, and Steel City coach was asking why Bo Collins didn't get to participate in the spring. Chief Brody kind of answered it. He was actually living in South Bend in the spring, but he was finishing his degree at Clemson online. And so because he was still basically a Clemson student, he was not allowed to practice with the Fighting Irish during the spring. So that's kind of the long and the short of that. Another one from Joe. Georgia having as many criminals as professionals is going to be the standard going forward because all they care about is winning a national championship. We in or we out on that. It sure seems, I mean, It sure seems like the easy answer is in right now because like all this repeat stuff going on down there at Georgia. I don't understand what's going on down there. Like, how is it? It would be one thing even if this was a professional team, an NFL team that you saw all this stuff going on, but it was a college team, and it's like it feels like every other week you hear some of this stuff. So it's an unfortunate end. I'll go ahead and answer this from Willie. He says, if this has already been discussed, my apologies. It hasn't. Anyone hear anything about Deuce Knight having a visit to Auburn this past weekend? This is up on the Champions Lounge. Brian posted something this afternoon. So if you're a Champions Lounge subscriber, go to the Champions Lounge and read the intel there after this show, of course. Yeah, I guess you can bring it up like during this show and you can read it, but so there is some intel up there about Deuce Knight and Auburn. So you can check that out. Another one from D Troll Hunter. The SEC will get a 9-3 team in the playoff over a 10-2 Big 12 conference runner-up team. Oof, man. I'm going to go out. I guess it depends on how many, like 10-2, 11-1, 12-0 teams are in front of the 9-3 team and who that 9-3 team lost to. Because like when you look at most of the SEC schedules, like they're not all playing everybody, like Georgia isn't playing, they're not playing both Texas and Oklahoma and Alabama and Tennessee. Now they're playing some of those obviously, but they're not playing all of, the top teams in the conference. So, I mean, this is why the SEC and the Big Ten, before we even got the 12-team playoff format, why they wanted to expand the format to 14 teams, because they want the opportunity to get a fourth team and maybe even sometimes a fifth team in there. But if it's a conference runner-up in the Big 12, that means they were they wouldn't be 10-2. They'd be 10-3 probably at that point, right? Because 10-2 is the regular season, 12 games regular season. So they would probably actually be 10-3 at that point. But, if we kind of slide it the other direction, if they were 11-1 and now they're 11-2 and their second loss is in the Big 12 championship game, I'm still going to be out on that. I'm going to be out on that. I think that, especially assuming it's a competitive game in the conference championship game, all those different things, because I don't think it's as easy as, this 11-1 team, 11-2 team, this, because it's still there's going to be some factors, who they played, who they lost to, who they beat, how competitive are those conference championship games, all those different kind of things. Like if it's as competitive, for example, as Baylor, Oklahoma State a few years back, the year that Oklahoma State ended up playing Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl, I think that the loser of that team is going to be in the playoff. I don't think they're going to get snubbed from the playoff. They might end up being like a 10 or 11 seed, maybe a 12 seed, something like that. Again, it's all just going to depend on a lot of different factors other than just record and a win or a loss in a conference championship game. Another one from D. Troll Hunter. Swimming is the best Olympic sport to watch, followed by women's gymnastics and then track. I am in on this. I'm at least in on the top two. I'm a little bit like track. Well, when we have like some high-end sprinters, whether it's male, female, men, women, the whole thing, I am in on the track, but we have just been down for the last few years, and Jamaica's overtaken us when it comes to Olympics and, world competition and stuff, at whether it's world championships or the Olympics or anything else. So I'm definitely in on swimming is the number one sport, and then women's gymnastics. Those are far and away the two that I watch the most when it comes to Olympics. I will say, actually, the beach volleyball, because I was just watching beach volleyball before I came in here, and I was watching some beach volleyball yesterday. I would put that above track right now. I think it's, and it's definitely a lot more exciting than your traditional indoor, regular volleyball, whatever your standard, volleyball. The beach volleyball is a lot of fun. And I mean, you talk about a cool setup that they've got there, with the Olympic beach volleyball stadium right outside the Eiffel Tower. That's pretty slick as well. I will say this as I digress a little bit on my Olympic coverage. I don't know how much you watched the Olympics over the weekend, but I was very disappointed with this Leon guy from France. He wins the gold medal and he dominates. That's great, and he's being coached by Michael Phelps's old coach, and he goes to Arizona State and all this different stuff. And he just dominated the field, getting the gold medal. He wins going away. Well, I don't know if you happen to watch that race, but he's dominating, and there's an American in competition with two other guys, like 3 body lengths behind him, but there's an American with 2 other guys still fighting for who's going to get the silver and who's going to get the bronze. But as soon as this French guy touches, it's like the race is over. Like they stop focusing on the American who was competing to get a silver medal. And ultimately he did get a silver medal out of the thing. But it's like, come on, going to watch the Olympics, your main focus. If I'm watching NBC, which I am, I live in America. It's an American TV network. You should be focused on the American first, right? I mean, that's when my jingoism comes out, is when the Olympics come around. Michael's saying men's track didn't win an individual gold at Tokyo. So it kind of backs up what I was saying. And they do. They show everything live in the afternoon, and then they kind of play the hits again in the evening coverage. So that, to me, is like one of the many benefits of working from home is while I'm working, I can watch live Olympic coverage. So that's kind of cool right now. DK, Winter Olympics are 10 times better than Summer Olympics. In or out? Out. Totally out on this. Summer Olympics rule. I like a couple things in the Winter Olympics. Of course, everyone watches figure skating because that is what is on the most. I like watching the curling. I'm actually at least somewhat into the curling. I like the short track speed racing there when it comes to the Winter Olympics. Those are my favorite things at the Winter Olympics. But sorry, DK. I know, like, you're, Mr. Hockey and all that kind of stuff. But I am out on the Winter Olympics being better than the Summer Olympics. Summer Olympics rule, my friend. They rule. As we continue with more We In, We Out, I'll just remind you to hit the like button if you would. Greatly, greatly appreciated. Helps us out all the time. DJ asks, without being asked directly in the presser, Marcus Freeman will mention freshman KVA, Kingston Viliamo Asa, and Micah Gilbert. We in or we out on that? I'm going to go out. Maybe KVA, because you're saying Marcus Freeman without being directly asked. So this kind of leaves it open a little bit. I think he will be asked about Viliamo Asa, and he'll be one of the guys that we're looking at, kind of seeing where his reps are and that kind of thing. And again, he's not going to be out there making any tackles or anything like that. So there's only so much to be gleaned. But the biggest thing is he getting first team reps? Is he getting second team reps? Is he playing alongside Drake Bowen? Like all those different things, like Jack Cut. I don't anticipate that happening on the first day. So I will say I'm out on this. I don't think he's going to go directly to either one of these freshmen. They tend to try, they tend to avoid specifically bringing up the freshmen, like unless they're asked what freshmen are standing out, those kind of things. Like that would be, I think, when those guys come up. Also from DJ, the first question in the after practice press conference will be about Riley Leonard's ankle. Again, if I'm putting odds down, there's probably a pretty good chance. And it's also going to depend on who gets the first question. Like, because, there's like one or two, like this guy is known for asking the injury questions. This guy is known for this, that kind of stuff. I'm going to go out just because I feel like there are enough other things on the list to go through. I think the odds say it will not be that question. Like, will offensive line come up first? I think there's a good chance offensive line comes up first. Benjamin Morrison's shoulder will be a question that will be asked. And, again, he'll probably be out there on the field in some capacity, but the extent of that capacity will be the biggest question, I think. Joe says, do they draw straws for who gets to ask first? I mean, it's literally whose hand goes up and sometimes who they happen to see first. So that's kind of where that goes. So I think there's a good chance that a question is asked about a slew, and there aren't that many injuries right now, but you might get a question right off the top about, like combination of Riley Leonard, Benjamin Morrison, Mitchell Evans, for example, those three guys, like what's the status on them right now? That kind of stuff. Like you might get like that combination question asked right away. Another one from DJ, at least one player being on a bike and not participating will be a big surprise to the media. We in, we out on that. I'm going to go in on this because it always seems like there is at least one, if not two guys who are on the bike early in camp who we were not expecting to be on the bike at camp that they, never talk about off the record kind of going in. So I'm going to go in on that. I think we're going to see somebody on the bike. And of course, if you're on the bike, that means you're not practicing. You have some kind of injury that you're dealing with. So I'll go in on that. I will, I'll say that we potentially see that on day one, Wednesday. All right, let's turn the page and go to some more. Black Irish 864 Riley Leonard will be used a lot in the running game. We in or we out on that? I guess the question is, what's your definition of a lot? Like, is he going to run? He is. I think the biggest thing, and this will be kind of something, again, I don't know how much we'll actually get to see of, like of them actually running some offense and those kind of things. And kind of going back to what I was talking about before, like part of the reason that I think a big reason that I think we're not getting that many full practices is because of the fact that Notre Dame has a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback as well. And that quarterback, the things that we saw that were live in the spring, it was other quarterbacks that we saw, Angeli Carr and Minchie. We didn't get to see Riley Leonard live that much. Now, I think there's going to be a lot of RPO. There should, I think that's what I anticipate anyway. There's going to be a lot of RPO and opportunities for Riley Leonard to run. Now, of course, just because it's RPO doesn't mean he's the one who will be running, but they want to keep him upright, but they also have to keep him part of the offense in terms of the running game, because I think that opens up the field so much more. And it also opens up the field for those running backs to be able to do their thing when the quarterback is a bigger factor. Like Leonard ran the ball 124 times in his full healthy season at Duke in 2022. He ran the ball just 58 times last year. And of course, he was injured more than half the season. So I think he ends up with at least 100 carries this season would be kind of the ballpark that I'm looking at. And that's just the regular season, because obviously you get to the playoffs, all those count for the stats as well. But regular season, I think that he is in at least 100 carries. And, to kind of go back to, like, do they have a lot of designed runs for Riley Leonard? I would say some. Again, like some of those will come, either RPO, zone read, whatever it happens to be. But at the same time, I think that when the play breaks down, Riley Leonard knows that he can use his legs to get out there and, not just make your run of the mill run for 5 yards and slide type play. Because of the kind of runner that he is, I think that when the play breaks down, he'll use his legs off script quite a bit as well, whether or not, again, that is actually planned. D Troll Hunter, the 105 player roster limit with no walk-ons allowed. We in or we out on that? I am out. This is a question that, Marcus Freeman hasn't had a chance to answer this question yet. So maybe this comes up on Wednesday, since this will be his first opportunity. But like where Notre Dame's roster is right now, this is with the walk-ons. They're right around, I think it's 116 players on the current roster. So, and that's, again, with walk-ons. So now the one side of this is you get to give out more scholarships than the 85-man scholarship. So you get to give out 20 more scholarships, basically. But you're also going to be giving up probably 10 to 15 players on your roster. And I think that where that really comes into play is when you start looking at your scout team and it's November and guys are banged up and, all these different things. Now, again, you can say, well, you're giving out more scholarships, so you've got a chance to get more bodies in there. And, like, I'll be really curious to see. And I saw a thread on this on the Champions Lounge. And again, I don't know what the answer is just yet, because it is so new that, like, how teams approach it, where they're giving out those extra scholarships to compensate for the fact that you're not going to have free labor, basically, with the walk-ons out there. But I think it's going to come into play in November when you've got banged up bodies and you don't have a full scout team full of walk-ons who you can put out there, and you don't have to worry about, quite honestly, whether or not they're, like, what's going to happen to them in regards to Saturday. So that's kind of, I'm out on it, at least initially. Maybe I can be proven wrong and it looks differently than what I think that it's going to look like. But yeah, and DK says you can give partial with the extra 20 scholarships. And yeah, so theoretically with the partials, with the ones that go above 85, you can get a walk-on type guy and give them some money for coming in, but you still can't go over 105, so, like, it's only going to go so far. So, yeah, I don't know. Initially I don't like it because of that whole, the depth in the scout team. And I'm not sold on what this is going to bring about. Appreciate it, Ryan. At least I have good questions, good material to work with from the Champions Lounge with the we in, we out, whether I'm solo or not. Hopefully it's not totally boring, like just listening to one guy ramble on and on and on and on, doing one thing. So, yeah. Joe Allen, just like with Florida State, if Riley Leonard is out and Notre Dame is 10-2, they would be excluded from the college football playoff. You in or you out on that? I would say the odds say I am in on this, because if Notre Dame is 10-2, now, part of it, again, is going to depend on, okay, what games did Riley Leonard play in? Who did he beat? Who did they lose to while he was doing that? Did the losses, like, was the backup, was he the one that lost to the better teams on the schedule, for example? So I think all of those things are going to come into play. Obviously, Florida State ran its schedule last year, including the ACC championship game. And, that didn't matter to the selection committee. So I think that if a 13-0 team can get left out, granted, there's a big difference between 13-0 in a 4-team playoff and 10-2 in a 12-team playoff. But I would say the odds are very great that Notre Dame would get left out if that scenario happened. If Notre Dame finds itself 10-2 and Riley Leonard is not healthy and unable to play at the end of the season. And, look, that's why you have these situations where coaches do, in many cases, do everything they can to keep from disclosing the status of injuries and things like that. Now, like the case with Florida State, I think that obviously became a situation where they couldn't hide from the fact they had a torn ACL. So there wasn't much that they could do about that. But that's why coaches, again, they dance around that as much as possible. Mr. Rogers 15, in or out, season stats, passing yards, 3,000 plus. I am in on that. Notre Dame threw for a little over 3,200 passing yards last year. Rushing, 2,000 plus yards. I am in on that. Notre Dame was, what was the number that they had last year? I think that they were a little over 2,600 rushing yards last year. So I'm in on that. 40 plus points per game. I am in on that. I've said that I think that they're going to be at least 40 points a game, maybe 41, maybe 42, could be even a little bit higher based on the schedule that they're going to play. So I am in on that. So I'm 3 for 3 so far. And then a plus 10 turnover ratio. They were plus 7 turnover ratio last year. And this will be a little bit of a question because I'm going to go in. So I'm going to go in on all of them. I was about to maybe try to tuck myself into an out because, does Riley Leonard have a couple more interceptions or whatever? Maybe. I don't think that he's going to have the fumbling issues that we saw Sam Hartman have, those kind of things. So I'm going to go in on all of these. 3,000 plus passing yards, 2,000 plus rushing yards, 40 plus points a game, and plus 10 turnover ratio. I am down. I am down for that. I am in on all of those. Another one for Mr. Rogers 15. In or out, Notre Dame has more transfers in this year's roster selected in the next NFL draft than traditionally recruited players. Oh, man. I saw this question earlier, and I forgot to kind of go through my head and go, which way are we going on this? I think Riley Leonard, Bo Collins, boom, boom. Jordan Clark, at the very least, I think Jordan Clark will be, again, he could play, he could end up playing a lot higher than this, but I think he'll get drafted because, NFL teams, like a lot of colleges, they like, the legacy guys as well. He's got a dad who is in the NFL. He's a prominent guy, all those different kind of things, who's got connections around the NFL. So I think you've got 3 right there. Rod Hurd, I think, has a pretty good possibility. I think RJ Oben is going to be drafted as well. So let's say 5 right there. Those are the transfers. You're going to have Benjamin Morrison, Xavier Watts, Howard Cross, Riley Mills. There's 4 guys who are currently on the roster. I'm trying to think. This won't be an offensive line class. Mitchell Evans will have a pretty good shot because if Mitchell Evans stays healthy throughout the entire season, I think that he is going to be good enough to be a pretty good NFL draft prospect. And with the injury history that he has, he'll be gone. Goodwin, NH. I forgot about Chris Mitchell. I think he'll be drafted as well. So that is 6 transfers versus 5 traditional guys so far. I don't know about Jack Kaiser. I think that that there's probably a pretty good chance for Jack Kaiser to be a UDFA, an undrafted free agent. Because the fact that he's a 6th-year guy and some of the questions that he has in terms of size and how durable he ends up being. Can he stop the run playing inside at will linebacker as opposed to Rover? I think he'll be a bubble guy. Can he play himself into that kind of spot? Michael Parks, Goodwin, Mitch Jeter. I don't see it. Kickers, very few and far between. Like, it's a very low percentage of kickers who end up getting drafted. I think that he's at the very least going to have a pretty good chance to be signed by somebody as an undrafted free agent when all is said and done. I'm trying to think of any other like recruited, but I was trying to think of the word to say it. I guess like how did Mr. Rogers say it? More transfers in this year's roster selected than traditionally recruited. Traditionally recruited is how he said it. Because I'm trying to think of who else it might be. Not going to be offense. No more Jordan Botelho. I mean, that's going to be a big question. Like, if Botelho finally lives up to his potential, he'll get drafted this year. Jaden Harrison, though, I think he's going to have a good, again, how much he plays wide receiver versus his kickoff return stuff. I think at the very least, Harrison, as of right now, not knowing how he's going to impact the wide receiver depth chart, as of today, I think that Jaden Harrison is a guy who can end up in somebody's training camp just because of the fact that he's got kickoff return skills and that kind of stuff. So he might make a very desirable undrafted free agent kickoff return guy, that kind of thing. I'm looking, I don't see any other names that are popping out at me in terms of DK is just trying to stir it right now. He's nominating Tyler Buckner for the transfers who are going to get drafted. DK, speaking of which, Marcus Freeman wins the Bear Bryant Award. Interesting. So I did a little research on this today, on the Bryant Award. Lou Holtz, the only Notre Dame coach to win the Bear Bryant Award in 1988. Also, there's never been an African-American / Black head coach who has won this award. And now the Bear Bryant Award is for what you do both on and off the field. And so I think that gives Marcus Freeman a leg up. Like last year, Mike Norvell won the award. Couple of years ago, it was a little bit more non-traditional. I can't think of it off the top of my head right now. I'm going to go out for right now, just because it seems like there are a ton of other variables that come into play, like this tends to be one, it seems like did you vastly outperform your preseason expectations? And Notre Dame is going to go into this season as a top 10 team. So I don't think they're going to have a chance to outperform that. But when you throw in the off the field stuff and Marcus Freeman's personality, I think he has a chance to be a contender. But I'm going to go out right now just because these awards just, Brian Kelly had 2 undefeated seasons and was never able to reel one of these in. And I think you could probably argue that Marcus Freeman probably has more going off the field, personally, than Brian Kelly. I know, Brian Kelly, they did the cancer, wing at, he and Pocky over at the hospital and stuff like that. But I'm just gonna say, DJ said the biggest variable is Bear being 0-4 against Notre Dame. So there is There is that because, you're talking about an organization that is Alabama based since it is the Bear Bryant Award. Balpine Shillelagh, one of R.J. Oben or Josh Burnham or both, have a great season and make the defensive end position a strength this year. We in or we out? I'm in on this. I think that both of these guys are going to play very well together in tandem. And depending on what happens over at that Viper position, like, do we see maybe Burnham get some opportunities over there at some point if those other guys are underperforming? I will be curious to kind of see how that goes. But at the very least, I think that both of these guys are going to be pretty productive. I really see RJ Oben having a season really similar to what Javonte Jean-Baptiste had last year. And I think Burnham is going to excel in that number 2 role as well. So I'm very high on this defensive end spot. Michael Parks in on Boubacar. I'm tentatively in on Boubacar as well. But we got to see what that looks like in front of him here early on. Another one from Balpine. We're used to seeing some impressive defensive routes of good teams in recent years. Clemson in 2022, USC 23, filled with turnovers and short fields for the offense. With this in mind, this season, we instead witnessed Notre Dame pull off an unexpected offensive route of a good team. We in or we out on that? So, I mean, the list is obviously pretty thin in terms of the good team. Do I think that they are going to go into Texas A&M week 1 and rout the Aggies? No, I don't. Now, I think they're gonna win the game. I think they're gonna win by at least 10, is what my gut tells me right now. And because of the heat and because of the depth that Notre Dame has, because of better quarterback play, I think that they, have a chance to win by at least a couple of touchdowns, wear them down in the fourth quarter and that kind of thing, despite the heat. But I don't see a blowout. Like the only other ones as of right now, like is Louisville's defense somewhat comparable to last year? Like, are we going to consider Georgia Tech a good team? I mean, if Notre Dame routes them, we're not going to consider them a good team. Like they're a little bit of a sleeper pick right now in the ACC. Georgia Tech, Florida State, elite defense last year. A lot of questions on how close they come to that this year. So, okay, DJ thinks that they're going to take A&M to the woodshed. We'll see. Again, I think it's going to be a little bit of a chess match in the first half because of the fact, the Riley Leonard, Mike Elko connection, those kind of things. I think one benefit is it's a completely different coaching staff than the A&M staff that faced Mike Denbrock when he was at LSU a couple of years ago. I think that helps. But I'm going to go out on this, mostly just because, again, I don't think it happens in week 1 on the road. DK, good point. Depends on the offensive line. Again, I think the offensive line is going to be more than capable and they'll be fine ultimately. But I just don't know that there are enough other opportunities beyond Texas A&M for that, kind of opportunity to present itself over the course of the season. Like what we actually consider a good team. Again, Florida State would be the other one, but Florida State has a ton of questions going into this season in terms of the defense. And if you haven't seen it, last week I had the interview with Kurt Weiler, the Florida State insider, and we talked a lot of those different questions that Florida State has. They were an elite secondary. They were a pretty close to elite, front 7 pass rush type team last year in terms of the sacks and all that kind of stuff that they had. But I think that they've got, there is just so much turnover in the amount of guys that they had drafted. I think they're going to have a hard time being anywhere close to that same. Like they can still be a good defensive team, but I think that they're going to have a hard time being a truly elite defensive team this year. So that's why I'm out on that. All right. Thanks again for the we in, we out questions. And again, you can find them or you can post them whenever we do it on the Champions Lounge. If you're not a Champions Lounge subscriber, what are you waiting for? Get there right now. Subscribe. Get all that juicy intel like Brian Driscoll has been putting up the last couple of days. So with that, I'm going to bring in my old buddy, Vince D'Addario. All right, Vince, are you ready for rapid fire?
So ready for rapid fire. I have been looking forward to this all day long.
All week long. Like it's been a while.
Good point. It's been a while. And
I know.
I'm fired up. I'm fired
We're
up.
2 days away. 2 days away from the start of training camp. So I mean,
say it ain't so.
You want to get fired up. What's the biggest question you've got heading into Wednesday's start of Notre Dame fall training camp?
So many directions. So many directions, Sean Stiers, to go with this particular question. I think at this point, because look, obviously we have dissected and analyzed and gone over just about every storyline, I would think.
Ad nauseum.
Yes. Because it's what we do. It's part of the gig, right?
That's why I'm glad it's almost actually here now.
Well, the problem is we're not going to get any new storylines because we don't get to see anything, but that's a different conversation.
Yes.
I think the biggest question I have, I'm going to boil it all down. What happens with the offensive line? Who is going to end up start? I've heard a lot of things about the right tackle position and, you know, the top two guys that are duking it out for that. It sounds like there could be an upset here. The left guard position, how does Joe Rudolph, how does he end up going about it? Is he going to go with the good old safe pick, or does he go with the ceiling pick?
Upside, yeah.
The upside pick where, if you're grading it on like 10 plays, that 8 plays could be amazing, but you might get 2 whiffs, or you get 10 plays of, well, he went to the right guy. You know what I mean? Like, what is important? What do you want to do? And I think the answers to those questions on the offensive line will go a long way to telling us how good this team could be.
I mean, I think that is like the single biggest storyline probably heading into fall training camp. What's going to happen at those 2 spots?
Yeah.
Like when you look at the left guard with Coogan and Spindler, I mean, one way or another, you've got a guy who was a starter at the start of last season who's going to be disappointed. That both of them can't end up out there, assuming Schrouth is going to be the right guard, which I think we pretty much all do. And like things that we're hearing kind of tend to point in that direction as well. But those are arguably the 2 biggest spots up for grabs going into training camp. There's no doubt about it. The left guard and the right tackle.
And we will see none of that on Wednesday. I mean, outside of who lines up where on the first day, which will give us something to talk about, you know what I mean? But
yeah,
they're not wearing pads, Sean. You're not going to see anything outside. Like, anytime we go to the first practice of the season, it's like, okay, who's lining up with the 1s? Who's lining up with the 2s? That kind of thing. But at the end of the day, look, there's a good chance, like, for example, Don Schuler is going to line up as the starter at safety.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Because that's where he was pretty much next to Xavier Watts when the spring ended, because Rod Hurd wasn't practicing here. So
100%. So anytime, you've got a new guy or whatever, they're not going to start on day 1. It's just kind of how it always works. You know what I mean? And so whoever the incumbent or the upperclassman is probably going to get the nod on day 1, that kind of a thing. And so let's say there was a ton of movement at quarterback over the summer. I don't know if there was. I have no idea. Let's say there's a ton of movement. It won't matter. Steve Angeli is going to get the 2 reps. Minchie's going to get the 3 reps. CJ Carr is going to get the 4 reps. Period. You know what I mean? So that's the tough part.
And if they mix those reps up, it's likely going to come long. When we get those 5-period practices, it'll be in period 7, 8, 9, or
100%.
whatever it happens to be.
Let's say they run CJ Carr out with the twos on Wednesday, right? They might as well just just throw a bomb over in the media because the place will explode.
Well, see, and this is actually kind of where I'm going with my answer to this question. It's not as much regarding CJ Carr, but I guess my question is, are we going to get this artificial Riley Leonard versus Steve Angeli quarterback competition to start camp like we've started the last few camps, going back to Jack Cohn in 2021, like with Drew Pine and all that different stuff. Are we going to have some of these guys out there who are watching these practices and doing the measuring stick of every throw that we see and actually, making these comparisons? Are we going to get those questions at the start of camp? Because when spring ended, Riley Leonard wasn't healthy, obviously, and Steve Angeli was the de facto number one quarterback. So I guess that's my question, because there were some of those questions toward the end of spring. How long are you going to go till you name a starter? Like, are we going to get that artificial storyline going into training camp? That's, maybe I'm cheating a little bit, but I'm wondering, are we actually going to get that at the start of this camp?
For your sake, I hope not, because you're the one that has to write the stories about these things, and I really hope that you don't have to write that artificial story.
Spend time,
Look, Marcus Freeman can just put that whole thing to rest and be like, okay, guys, breaking news here. Riley Leonard is our starter. After Riley Leonard, it's a competition.
Right.
That's reality, right? I mean, everybody and their brother knows that Riley Leonard is a starter on this football team, and it's not close. It's not close. And so just put it to bed, man. Don't be like, it's a competition like that. Like, can you even, if you're Marcus Freeman, can you even say that with a straight face?
That's what, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing if that's the narrative that they're pushing? I would have a problem with that, just from guys, there's other actual storylines that we can report on and talk about. Why don't push that one? Because that's not a storyline. It's not real,
Well, and we're going to get Mike Denbrock on day 2 as well. We're going to get to talk to the offensive coordinator on day 2. Day 1, Marcus Freeman holds his regular press conference after we watch a full practice. And then day 2, we get to watch the 5 periods that morning, and then we leave, but then we come back and we're going to get Mike Denbrock right away. So
Mike Denbrock's a pretty honest guy. I would like to think. So that'll be interesting, because the majority of the conversation is going to be around the quarterback position, with Mike.
There was a story, I think it was middle of last week, basically, that came out saying Riley Leonard says he's healthy and all, 100% healthy and all those different things. And if that's the case, I mean, that's the only question, I think, as far as most of us are concerned with Riley Leonard, is just how healthy is he? And we'll obviously have an eye on that, seeing exactly what he looks like, because the last time we saw him, he was still walking around in the ankle brace and doing all those different things, like the closest he looked was at the Blue Gold game when I think he was so itching to get out there. He was wearing the uniform. He obviously wasn't going to play in that thing, but like, how's Riley Leonard moving, all those different things. But I just hope we don't get the half-baked, there's a quarterback competition going on here at the top.
So. No doubt.
So you won't be able to be there on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So what's the number one thing that you want me to watch for you when we go out there? I mean, it can be what we just talked about if you want.
Well,
but like if you have something different, like I'm right away.
Yes.
Where would VD's eyes be going if you were out there?
Ill-timed family vacation. It
happens
from a work standpoint.
I think mine was at the start of camp last year, if I remember.
Yeah, it was.
Right, so
it was, but it's ill-timed for work, but it's perfectly timed for everybody else in my family. So it is what it is. You know what I mean? With high school sports, I got 2 high school sports kids now, and like trying to manage those schedules and everything. So, I mean, it is what it is. But here's the deal. You have to understand the structure of the practice, right? The structure of the practice is it's helmets, and that's it. I mean, it's not like a nudist colony. You got
basically jerseys and
but
shorts.
It's jerseys and shorts and helmets.
No pads.
No pads. Sometimes they have like those interesting like little plasticky type protection on their shoulders, but there's no shoulder pads, right? And so what can you glean from that type of a practice, right? Outside of who lines up with the 1s and 2s and 3s, what can you glean? Can't glean anything from offensive line, defensive line. Can't really glean much from running backs and linebackers, okay? Because I want to see if those guys can hit and take a hit and that kind of thing.
Right.
So you're stuck with the secondary, wide receivers, receiving tight ends, and quarterbacks. You might be able to get a little bit of an evaluation out of those groups. And so with that being the case, it's the quarterback position because look, it's not going to be live. So what Steve Angeli's worst quality, quote unquote, would be some of his decision making and how long it takes him to make a decision. And you're not going to be able to see much of that, right? It's going to be how does the ball look when it comes out of his hand, and all the other guys as well. Is the timing with the receivers, good? That would be a Riley Leonard question.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. And I think basically when I talk to you on Wednesday via text, which is going to happen, be like, hey, how did the quarterbacks look? That's going to be the question. That's going to be the legit question. How do the quarterbacks look? You know what I mean? Because, even just watching the quarterbacks warm up, you can see, okay, how does the ball come out of their hand? All of those different things. So I want to see the relationship with their pass catchers. I want to see, I know what it's going to be, but who comes out with the second team, who comes out with the third team, that kind of stuff. And does it look like 2, 3, and 4 are getting fairly equal reps, right? Because that. First of all, that's really hard to do, to give 4 guys equal reps.
Yeah.
That's really hard. So what does that look like? So it's all quarterback based for me when I talk to you. It's going to be all quarterback based.
And I don't blame you. I think that's, because of, like you said, the way practice is structured, once they're done with the stretching and all that different kind of stuff, that's what they'll do is the quarterbacks will be out there and they'll start throwing likely to wide receivers against air, whether they start with that 4 quarterback drill where all 4 of them are throwing to different guys at the same time, or whether they just start with some lighter. So whatever it happens to be, that's just naturally
right.
We're all going to want to see it because, again, like going back to Riley Leonard and his health for starters. But then the other things, like you were talking about, how's the ball come out of the hands, and how do you compare what, especially those other what does Riley Leonard look like versus Steve Angeli versus Kenny Minchie versus CJ Carr? Just the simple things.
And that's going to be a good barometer as well, right? Because look, Riley Leonard's a starter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does he look like, if you just went in there and you just crawled out from under a rock from the past, 9 months, does Riley Leonard look like a starter? You know what I mean? Does he have the most zip on his ball? Does he carry himself like the starter? Is he walking with a limp? All of those different things. I don't think he will. I think he is probably 100%. I haven't, we've seen enough video of him walking around and doing some different things. I don't think that will be the case, especially in a practice setting like this, because it's not going to be highly, physical on his lower half. I mean, but it was his right ankle, right?
It's going to be basically the stuff that he's been doing all summer, throwing
Absolutely.
to wide
100%.
receivers, throwing the football around.
But, look, you've watched enough football to know, I believe it was his right ankle. That's his plant foot. That's the one he's pushing off of. And you're going to be able to tell, is the ball sailing? Is the ball drifting? What does that look like? So even if you don't see a limp, you're going to be able to tell, is that ankle 100%?
Yeah. What kind of drive does he have? Yep.
Exactly.
But then, like you said, the timing as well, since he didn't get to throw with these guys, especially the new guy, the new guys, the guys who are all like, he was new to this team, but when you add Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jaden Harrison into the mix as well. Now, again, he's been working with those guys this summer because that's the biggest thing that you get to do as when there aren't official practices going on, those workouts that they do, the conditioning doesn't last all day.
Right.
You do some of that, but then as the quarterback, you get those guys out there, and I'm sure that he's been, leading some pretty healthy drills all summer long.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, we haven't seen Bo Collins before. How does he look catching the football? And, just all of those bits and pieces and parts.
That's what I've been brushing up. I've been trying to brush up over the last couple of days on the numbers.
That's the hardest part, dude.
Bo Collins, number 5, by the way.
Yeah. You better make sure that you get yourself a roster.
I know.
Because with all the new numbers, and we know the new numbers, but seeing them is going to be different. And, especially, I know that's not the case for you, but it is for me. I've been playing college football. I've been playing with Notre Dame on and off. Their numbers are all wrong on the game. And so, I've gotten used to seeing
what I hear.
Great house with 19. And
that's true.
I think
so now you're on. Now you got
Bo Collins is 5.
Uh-huh.
No. Faison is 5. He's actually 6. Bo Collins is actually 5, but I think they have him in 1. So it's like, I gotta.
And Great House is 1 now. They've got him, with his old 19 and that whole thing. So.
Exactly. So it's all jacked up, and I need to get on board.
I bet that throws a lot of people off out there.
It will.
Who they think they're seeing and stuff like that for anyone who's been playing that thing.
There's no doubt about it.
All right, fill in the blank. The Notre Dame player we're not hyping enough right now is blank.
I had to sit and think about this one for a little bit because
I actually did too.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different routes you could go. Here's where I'm going to go. I'm going to get on, I don't know if it's the petty train or not, but I'm going with Drake Bowen, the forgotten middle linebacker because of KVA. Everybody seems to think
it's actually a good answer because
it's like,
I think from the fan base especially, because my thought was are we not actually hyping KVA enough because everyone else seems to be on that hype shit,
Sure. I get that.
But Drake Bowen, I think, is probably a great answer because everyone seems to want KVA. Drake Bowen has been discarded already, and the guy is just moving into a potential starting spot.
Yes. I mean, he hasn't even taken a snap as a starter, and he's already yesterday's news. If that doesn't tell you how crazy the recruiting game is, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, shiny new toy, and he flashed in the spring. So, all these true freshmen should be playing because they flashed in the spring or they've got a high star rating or whatever. These other guys had a pretty good star rating too, and they've been here for a little bit, very little. He's a sophomore, right? Mm-hmm. So, but he had a whole year under JD Bertrand, for example, from a mental standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, from all of those different things. He's been in Al Golden's defense for a couple of years now. All of the different things. We're all so excited about who Drake Bowen was and what he could be. And now, yesterday's news, baby. Put him out with the trash. It's Wednesday morning. Get him out of here. Put in the true freshman with all the upside. Come on, man. Give this kid a break. Give him a shot.
Again, I like that because it does feel like that there's much more hype on Kingston Viliamu-Asa than there is Drake Bowen. And, Drake Bowen was a guy who a year ago, everyone wanted to see more of him. But
right, exactly.
He's almost yesterday's news, and he hasn't even, the next season hasn't even started yet.
It's unbelievable. And look, KVA is a really good player. I want to be clear on that. He's a really good player, but he's also a true freshman. So he's going to make true freshman mistakes. Okay. And he's going to be a valuable piece to this defense. He is, but probably on a rotational, sub-type basis, his first year on campus. All right. You're going to have plenty of years of KVA, probably, and Drake Bowen together on the football field. This just isn't that year yet. I don't think. Maybe crazier things happen. I don't know.
I wanted to say one of the Rovers, Snead or Osbury on this, but there's just, there was so much hype on Osbury coming out of the spring because, they started moving him around as doing different stuff. Is that going to continue? Was that a spring experimentation? Because that's something that happens as well, is you have more leeway to do that kind of stuff in the spring, but it doesn't necessarily always translate to what happens once fall camp starts. So I kind of stayed away from those guys. I'm going with Jason Onye because I feel like, now again, there's been, at least at times over the last couple of springs, a certain amount of hype on him, but I feel like watching him this past spring, things were definitely, like when you use that C word, consistency.
Right.
I feel like things were starting to come together for him much more consistently. And again, like, he's not going to surpass a Riley Mills, for example, as the starter at that 3 technique, but he's got a chance to play alongside Riley Mills where like Howard Cross comes off the field in some of those 3rd down situations and stuff like that. And, again, how much of that we truly get to see during fall camp is TBD, just because of the way, these opportunities present themselves. But I just have a feeling that by the time fall camp is over, he could really be ascending coming out of it when all is said and done.
That's a really good one, because I think he was a little bit of the flavor of the week last year going into the season. You know what I mean? Because some cameras caught him, chirping and all these different things, and he kind of flashed at practice and stuff, and then the substance wasn't really there on a consistent basis. Maybe whether it was from playing time or whatever, wasn't really there during the season. And I agree with you. He started coming on a little bit towards the end, and so he's going to be a much more important piece this year than he was last year. Like the initial hype, I think, was a year early with him.
Right.
Or at least that's the way it turned out. You know what I mean? And so, he was last year, so we're not going to talk about him this year. And so we're not really talking about him a whole lot. The Boubacar Traore is the new Jason Onye as far as like
exactly, because he got out there in the spring game and made a couple plays in the spring game, which is great. I mean, it's what you're supposed to make plays if you can.
And he's long and athletic and all of those things, and he has a chance to be really good too.
If Jordan Botelho doesn't step up right away, all we're going to be hearing is, why isn't Boubacar playing out there more? Because of what people saw in the spring.
Right.
So that's just kind of the way that goes.
Botelho, that's going to be a whole other conversation. Like that, his, like, where he ends up from like floor to ceiling is such a huge range now, and where he's going to be. I have no idea. It's like, okay, shoot. Like, I have no idea what he's going to end up being. Because, like, again, I keep referencing the stupid video game, but like, he's a freaking All-American on that thing. Like, he is just destroying offensive lines. Does he have the athletic ability and the length to do that? Yeah, he sure does. But we have yet to see that on a consistent
basis.
Haven't
seen it consistently.
Yeah.
It's now or never now.
Yes, it is. He's a heck of a bowl game player. Let's just keep him on ice until the bowl game.
That's
bowl
right.
season.
Exactly. Just roll him out there.
Right.
For the bowl game. Okay, so Penn State head coach James Franklin was asked if his team could be one of the biggest beneficiaries of the college football playoff expanding to 12 teams during Big Ten Media Days last week. He had an interesting response. I don't know if you've seen or heard any of this.
Nope, this is all fresh.
I was gone for a few days, so here we go. Here's Penn State head coach James Franklin.
Obviously, a lot of people have kind of made that statement and talked about that statistic or that data, and that's great. For us, it's what do we do to put Penn State this year in the best position to make the playoffs, but then not just make the playoffs, put ourselves in an advantageous position in the playoffs. How do we put ourselves in a position to have an opening week bye? It's amazing. I've seen so many things about Notre Dame not having a bye as part of their requirements with the playoff. They do have a bye. They don't have a conference championship game. That's their bye. How do we get ourselves in a position to have a bye? If not a bye, how do we put ourselves in the best position to have a home game in Beaver Stadium, which would be an advantageous position with those elements at that time of the year. So that's our focus. How do we get into the playoffs? And then not only that, how do we put ourselves in the most advantageous position so we can make a run, and a run that could be up to 17 games? I think one of the interesting things that is a challenge with the college football playoff model is, in some ways, if you play in the Big Ten championship game and you lose the Big Ten championship game, that is a more challenging situation than not playing in the playoffs, not playing in the championship game and making the playoffs. And I don't know if that is ideal, but the reality is the conferences are making too much money from the conference championship game, and they're not going to give them up. But that's one of the things that's a little bit of a challenge and a curveball for the way the system is currently set up.
Didn't take long, Vince. There you go. James Franklin, Penn State head coach. What dropping a little Notre Dame in there. What'd you think about that?
I have to say, and it is a little biting coming out of my mouth. I agree with literally everything that he said. Everything he said, he was on the money. And even the last part about the conference championship game being a detriment to the team that actually loses that game. He is absolutely right. Now, I think the College Football Playoff Committee is going to give some credit to those teams, you know what I mean, that lose the conference championship game, unless they backed in, right? Like we've seen sometimes, back when they had divisions, you know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing. It will be curious to see, you know, especially depending on who wins and loses those games.
100%.
And like if it's an upset, for example, and we kind of touched on some of that last week, or, if it is a team with at least 2 losses, like how far do they fall now that they've got a third loss?
Exactly. So
those kind of things.
That will be very interesting to see. And I totally agree with him that can be a negative for the team that doesn't win, but you got to be in the game to win the game. And he talked about getting a bye and all that stuff. So it's like, you're darned if you do, darned if you don't kind of a situation. So I totally get that part of his argument. And can we disagree with the fact that Notre Dame gets a bye by not playing in a conference championship game? Like, that's what we've been trying to preach to people. Oh, we can only get the 5 seed and we can't get a bye. No, you get a bye. You automatically get a bye by not playing in the conference championship game. James Franklin's 100% correct. I mean, he's 100% accurate on that.
It took, it's amazing to me because all it took was Marcus Freeman going on a couple of ESPN shows.
I didn't hear anything he said.
And giving that perspective, because that's what he was talking about when he was doing those ESPN shows.
That makes more sense.
The college football playoff kept coming up. So Marcus Freeman gave that response. It's like, well, we have a bye. We don't have to play in week 13, which is conference championship game. And so now all these other coaches in these conferences hear that. They're like, well, Notre Dame's got a bye. They've got an advantage, So everyone's trying to spin this now to the great advantage that Notre Dame has, even though they don't get a first round playoff bye, all these coaches are already working it to like, this great advantage that Notre Dame is getting.
I mean, they're not wrong, which is why I was totally fine with them not being a 1 through 4 seed. You know what I mean? But it's hilarious that it took them this long to figure it out.
I know.
Because and why would they? Because they're not going to pay attention to what Notre Dame is doing in a at the time mythical 14-team playoff or 12-team playoff, or you know what I mean? Like, they haven't had to live it yet. And when you're a coach, you got to live in the now. I mean, you've got to worry about your own team and recruiting and all the blah, 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 blah. But it's funny. I didn't realize what Marcus Freeman had talked about on his little, road trip over to New York. And so now that you tell me that is 100% hilarious that now that's coming up in media days for other conferences. Like, that is pricelessly hilarious to me. So that's
exactly.
Awesome. That's
exactly. Great. Like, unprovoked. Here it comes.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Notre Dame's got an advantage.
Right in the middle of his tirade, that was not tirade, but whatever, his soapbox speech. That's great.
Like you said, he is completely right about. The conference championship game is a money grab, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how these teams, like these first few years of the playoff, how teams who are playing in those conference championship games, how they are affected when it comes to seeding, and I think that ultimately that's going to determine whether or not some of these conference championship games continue, whether or not these conferences are adversely affected by that, the team that loses those championship games and what their seeding ends up being. Because just to kind of reiterate to people, since we haven't been through this yet, the 4 buys, the 4 first round playoff buys, go to the 4 highest ranked conference champions. So like for example, if let's say Alabama is the number 1 seed in the SEC and they end up losing their conference championship game to Georgia, Ole Miss, whoever it happens to be. Well, obviously going into conference championship weekend, they stood to get a, like a first round bye. So now if they lose that game, they're not going to get a bye. How far do they also fall in the seeding? Again, like how long these conference championship games last, I think is ultimately gonna really depend on how things shake out the first few years of the playoff.
Very much so. It's something to keep an eye on for sure. Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
So, speaking of things that coaches say, a couple of years ago, Clemson head coach Dabo Swinney complained that the ACC network doesn't have its own version of Paul Feinbaum, who, of course, does his show on the SEC network. It is simulcast on the SEC network. And beyond just that, they don't have their version of a Paul Feinbaum who can essentially be a national voice for football programs in the ACC, the way Feinbaum is for the SEC. And that topic came up again last week when all the schools were gathered in Charlotte, North Carolina for ACC Media Days. A lot of ACC coaches think that a Feinbaum-like voice could have helped Florida State, for example, when they were snubbed from the playoffs last year, despite being 13-0. New Boston College head coach Bill O'Brien had this to say about the subject. Quote, "I wouldn't say Paul is a nice guy. I've been on the wrong end of Paul's commentary before, but that's what makes him who he is. He's not afraid to criticize. He's not afraid to praise when it's due. That's what the ACC needs. We don't need a guy or a woman who is going to praise us all the time. We need somebody like Paul who stirs the pot," end quote. So do you buy or sell, Vince, an ACC version of Paul Feinbaum?
Well, I sell it on the topic of if you had somebody like that, then Florida State makes it into the playoff. Because I would like to think that the playoff committee has a little bit more integrity than just like watching Wake Up, on ESPN in the morning and getting all of their opinions from that. Or Get Up, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I have a hard time thinking that would have made a difference. Now, if you have somebody that is like that, and maybe that's more entertaining for people, but I just don't think, in my opinion, and maybe I'm naive, maybe that's definitely possible, I just don't feel like it's going to have the impact that these coaches are saying that it's going to have. The ACC has a network. They have the ACC network, right? Don't they have that two-guy show?
Well, they used to, the Packer and Durham.
Yeah, that one.
They don't have that. But they did away with that show over a year ago, I think, because apparently not enough people were paying attention to it.
Look, Paul Feinbaum has a following and he has a footprint in SEC country, and then everybody else hates him. And so that has propped him up, it's a lot of like Stephen A. Smith, for example. He's you either love him or you hate him, and that's why he has a following. The ACC is not a conference that you love or you hate. They're just kind of there. And sometimes they got good teams, sometimes they got bad teams, sometimes they got both. And you don't love or hate the ACC. You just don't. They're not as polarizing as the SEC. They're just not. If Paul Feinbaum grew up in New Jersey, we wouldn't have the following that he does.
If the teams in the competition overall, if there was more depth in the ACC consistently, you would have it. And it wouldn't matter if Paul Feinbaum or anyone else. It's not like Paul Feinbaum only beats the drum or only criticizes SEC teams. I mean, there's enough. He spreads it around.
He definitely does.
Like we played, I think you were gone last week, or you were gone for part of the week. I think it was when you were gone, Jesse and I played when Lane Kiffin was actually on the Paul Feinbaum show, and Kiffin brought up when Feinbaum was, criticizing him back when Kiffin was the head coach at USC, saying they need to fire the guy on the tarmac. And guess what? He got fired on the tarmac, but Kiffin was also indirectly, thanking him for the indirect path that, kind of helped
him to where he
back,
is.
He ended up working for Nick Saban for a couple of years, and
that's huge.
It got his career restarted. But Paul Feinbaum is is a one of one, though, like, because
sure.
when you look at it, like, look at who else is on game day. It's former coaches and former players. Paul Feinbaum in the media landscape is the only former non-player whose voice has the kind of prominence that he has, So again, like, ACC Network tried something like this, but Mark Packer and Wes Durham's voices just aren't the same stature of Paul Feinbaum's. If they were, so I don't think that it's. I understand what they're saying. Like they feel like they need a cheerleader. But that's and even a critical voice, which Feinbaum is. But I don't think that it's going to get them what they think it would get them. The bottom line is the ACC just needs to be better from top to bottom. Like Clemson was Clemson for, whatever that stretch was when they were winning their 2 national championships. And there really wasn't a number 2. Florida State is better now. Is it going to be them and Clemson for a while to kind of carry the weight for the ACC, or is it just going to be one of them, or is one of them going to be average? I mean, that's the bottom line. If your conference is better, you'll get more playoff bids, and you won't need someone in the media beating the drum for you.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Look, what's the biggest storyline coming out of the ACC right now, Sean? It's that 2 teams won out. Like, that's not going to do you any favors, and it doesn't matter who's trumpeting, the positivity or the negativity or whatever. Like, is that really what you want right now? I don't think it is.
And they want, like Florida State, I think getting left out of the playoff is kind of a tipping point for them. And obviously, if Florida State was 13-0 in the SEC, I think that they would have, kind of been viewed differently, regardless of who their quarterback was. But they weren't 13-0 in the SEC. They're 13-0 in the ACC.
Exactly.
And if they would have been in the SEC last year, they wouldn't have been 13-0. They would have been a good team, but they just wouldn't have held up the same. So, like, the bottom line for them is they, like everyone, they want the money. They're not getting more money. They want out.
Yep.
So North Carolina head coach Mack Brown is 72 years old, which makes him the oldest football coach in the entire football subdivision. Here's a quote from Brown from last week. Quote, "Every coach recruiting against us says I'm going to quit, and 6 of them have been fired that said that already. So they ought to be worried about themselves." End quote. Rate that Mack Brown comment on a scale of 1 to 10, Vince.
That's like a 12. I love it, man. He is not afraid to speak his mind. Like, I've always been a Mack Brown fan as far as, who he is and what he's been able to do as a coach and all of those things. I mean, look, he guest starred on Friday Night Lights, Sean Steyer. That's all you need to know.
That's right.
You need to know.
That's right.
And that was a long time ago, by the way.
It was when he was still coaching in Austin. Yeah,
because
they filmed down there.
And so, I like Mack Brown. I don't think he's afraid to speak his mind, which I love. And he came right at it. I feel like he's got a list. I feel like he's got a list of people that are negatively recruiting against him by age, using age.
Checking the boxes.
He's checking them off. He's like,
he knows.
Yep. It's like how was it, Happy Gilmore, where the guy is like has the death list and he's just crossing off names. Like, I just feel like he's crossing names off of his list, and he knew that number when he was asked that question. Like, that was right here on the front of his brain. Like, he knew that number, and he probably could have told you the 6 names as well.
He's taking names. He's making a list that he's checking it twice.
I love it, man.
I love it. And, look, I don't know who, the negative recruiters are. There's some that you can probably guess, but I hate that kind of stuff.
Me too.
It's just recruit to who you are. You shouldn't have to be taking shots at somebody else. Mack Brown is, he's been a great coach. He's obviously won a national championship when he was at Texas. A lot of people thought that he underperformed when he was at Texas. He was out of the game for a while. He's come back, and he's produced a couple of high round draft picks.
Sure.
In terms of the NFL, we know he can coach offense, but the fact that people are taking shots at his age is just like,
come on,
if you can coach, you can coach. And I realize it's like, well, is he going to be there in 5 years and all that kind of stuff? But that shouldn't be your biggest selling point when you're trying to sell your
Exactly.
program is what's wrong with the other program.
And that's the key right there. Like, look, I know that, the recruiting that I've been doing with my kid, he's not a 5-star, or anything like that, right? But every stop we've made, these coaches and these teams are pushing themselves, what they have to offer. Not once has another school come up in a negative fashion. Not one time. In fact, the only time another school was brought up was actually a praise. They're like, man, their facilities are awesome. You know what I mean? Like, so, and that was a coach that I know kind of outside of the recruiting game, but like, they never bring up other schools, and again, it's not like they're necessarily competing for my kids' services. It's more like the other way around. But at the same time, there are kids in the room when they're giving these presentations and they're talking about recruiting and they're doing all these things. They don't bring up other schools, man. Like, it is just,
that's good.
They're just bringing up what they have to offer. And I think that's the way you should do it. And again, maybe I'm naive. I'm not a 5-star recruit's dad where they're handing out money and they're doing all these different things.
Right.
So it's different there.
And the higher you go, the more pressure there is, as we've seen with how some of the recruiting things that have happened around here in the last few weeks.
Right.
So,
and so I get it. I get it. It's just, it's sad. And I am dismayed that that's the case, but there's always been negative recruiting. It's just going after a guy's age. Like, come on, man. Like, you can go after a guy's, hey, well, he's not going to be there in 5 years either. It doesn't matter how old he is because he's going to jump from job to job to job. Like, I don't know. I just don't like the age thing personally.
Completely agree. 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Mac Brown. Yep. I love it.
Check.
All right, Vince, we're going to wrap it up with that. Fall training camp is beginning on Wednesday, so we can all be excited.
I will be focused on my family vacation, but with an eye towards Sean Steyer's texts. So
I'll see what I can get you. I'll see if I can set you up.
Appreciate it.
All right. Hit the like button, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. Again, training camp starts Wednesday, and we've got you covered here, both on our podcast platforms, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and of course, irishbreakdown.com and the Champions Lounge. If you're not a subscriber to the Champions Lounge, what are you even doing? Get there now. It's a perfect time to do it. Subscribe to the Champions Lounge, our premium message board where you get all kinds of good intel on Notre Dame football and more throughout the year. All right, Vince, I will talk to you later. Hit that like button.